came here to enjoy the relatively warm weather here in Seattle, but more to the point, I came here to give a talk about my recent work over the last year about measuring the effect of wind on various types of stoves. I went into it with a plan of how much work I thought it would take, and then some questions came up, so that much work became this much, and then this much, and then, oh, I might as well go a little farther, and then, oh, a little bit more yet, so it ended up being more work than I thought it would be. But I think I've at least started to take a look at an important question, which is, what is the effect of wind on these stoves? Increasing the wind beyond the minimum doesn't seem to have that much more of an effect, so that was a bit surprising. But in any case, the radiation from the coals is certainly important, at least with the open fire. With the taller stoves, with the rocket stoves, you'll have much less radiation, so I was happy with the natural gas test in those respects. With or without wind, you get a little bit of radiation, and then you get good strong convection, which is hopefully protected from the wind, and either way, you get about the same total heat transfer.
But we've remained basically a group of people who get together and talk about stoves once a year, which is different than being a conference or being a technical thing or being a lot of other stuff. And that means that everything's done by volunteers. Everything's basically provided to us at no cost other than the coffee and the rolls and the stuff like that. That keeps the everything inexpensive. We have no professional staff that organize this, as you've noticed. Some of you read me notes. Some of you said, how can you be this screwed up? And I said, well, I can schedule. Somebody kept sending me notes about agenda. One of you, who I won't mention your name, has sent me about 6 emails about what's going on with the agenda. Now, I got the last change to the agenda, which got included in the agenda, yesterday morning at about 11 o'clock, just before we printed it. I thought, before we print, let me check my computer. Ah, a change from Dean!
My work is sort of focused on the technical issues, and I know very little about what's happening in the big world of cook stoves or cook stove funding. But people are certainly starting to talk about it more and more in the mainstream. I'm told that in September there was a series of interviews on American National Public Radio, which is a very well-respected section of journalism, about cook stoves. And as you may or may not remember, there was a reporter from National Public Radio at the winter stove camp, which they just had at Cottage Grove last week.
The Global Alliance for Clean Cook Stoves is a unique public-private partnership that was launched in September of 2010 at the Clinton Global Initiative. It's a unique partnership between the private sector, international governments, the United Nations, and a range of NGOs working to promote clean and efficient cook stoves in the developing world.
Just to be clear, though, the UN Foundation is not part of the United Nations. We're a separate 501c3. We are not a UN agency. We work very closely with the UN. We support their work. In many cases, we fund their work. We're about a $130 million a year initiative, and about $30 million of that is our funding, and about $100 million is money we raise.
I was invited to speak to share with the participants here at Ethos a little bit about the Global Alliance, to solicit their input into the structure of the Alliance, because we're very much involved right now in developing how the Alliance will, the shape the Alliance will take moving forward. And I also wanted to learn more about some of the problems that stove developers, project developers were having in the field, so that we're best primed to address those problems from the Alliance. We have very ambitious goals. We're hoping to secure the adoption of 100 million clean and efficient stoves by the year 2020. So in 3 years, which is about a third of the way through the initiative, I hope that we're well underway with developing the initial activities that have come from the working group process. I hope we're well underway with our business models, with securing funding for the various activities that we've done, some of the initial health and climate research that's so critical, that we've made some real inroads in terms of advocacy. As I think you know, this issue is not well known by governments, although we're delighted that we've heard from Denmark, Norway, Malta, Germany, the US, of their interest and have provided funding. Italy as well has expressed interest to us in joining. So I hope 3 years from now we will be underway, that the issue won't be so new to people, but that they will be more familiar with the problems associated with inefficient stoves, and that they will be working collectively with us on solutions.
I went to my first stove camp. I really didn't know what was going on, but everybody was in a competition. But everybody was helping each other to compete and be the prize winner. And one guy, and I learned about rocket stoves, and one guy made a stove that was like this big and this thick, and it was made out of concrete. And here the judges were coming around, and they said, lightweight, easy and portable, easy to move and portable. And there was a silence in the room. And someone said, well, that stove, you could tie your oxen to it and your oxen wouldn't get away. And everybody laughed, and it was really great. We moved on to the next stove. Nobody felt bad. It was like really, really neat. And that same energy, the same cooperative integrity, everything, the scientific principles, the scientists and engineers at Applicazioni, I was so impressed. And that holds true to today. And the individuals that I know, the Larry and Fred and Damon and Dean and all these people, they just generate this really powerful, beautiful energy where people can come and they can feel good about being in a scientific environment where there's so much creativity and so much power.
Ethos meetings have been happening since at least 2000. I'm told the first one was maybe 12 people, and then 25, and then 50, and then we're up to about 150 now. We came up with the idea of Stove Camp at our Ethos meeting in January of 2003. It was like, we should get together and just design cook stoves. Just the design people should get together in the summer.
I make my little camp stove and for backpackers. And I was at an outdoor store at a sale for outdoorsmen. And a guy walked by and I said, hey, you got to look, I want to buy one of them stoves. And like I was doing down there. And he came in and said, hey, this is a really nice stove. You should come to Applicazioni and have it tested. And so then I went down and had the stove tested, and they said, oh, this is neat. You should come back to Stove Camp. And so I went back home and made plans so that I could be at Stove Camp. And I just brought tools down there so I could make things for other people, because I wasn't working on a stove at the time. So I went down and helped people make stoves. Since I was a little child, I always was making things and seeing how things work. And that led me to a career in construction. I went to carpentry school and then became a sheet metal worker and build buildings. And when there was less work, and I would work on my hobbies, and backpacking is one of my hobbies, and so to make a stove for backpacking that burns wood from the forest was perfect. And that's what made my little stove. The one place where I see we're making inroads and where we need to continue to strive is to get the people who know the methods and materials of manufacturing, not just theoretical, but actually know how to make things and make things for a living, have those people part of the process in the design of the stoves, so that the stove is not only functional and efficient and clean, but also that it's easy enough to build to where they can be built and create industries for the same people that will be using them. It makes more sense to do that than it is to make them in a foreign country and ship them, in my opinion.
We're losing a little bit of the flame on this side. It's blowing more to one other. I mean, now, am I getting something leaking up through it? Should I have a lower fan? Yeah, a pot stand. You have to, this is made, you don't not.
This started about 3.5 years ago for me. I took a trip down to the Cunha in Panama. So the Cunha is also known as the Apostle Islands. It's a coral atoll. It's a chain of 180 coral islands that runs from the canal zone down to the coast of Colombia. So it's paradise with problems, lots of problems. And one of the problems that I finally had to confront there was respiratory disease caused by indoor cooking. So in this beautiful place, the average life expectancy is 39 years old. That's primarily due to respiratory disease. We have all these beautiful children taking us by the hands, going, everywhere around the islands, and they all had snot dripping off their chins. The incidence of respiratory disease like bronchitis and asthma and stuff like that was frightening. I'm a blacksmith. I like fire. That's my thing. That's my medium. And I thought I could do something about this. I know I could. With the energy that I've still got and the years I've still got in my life, I could do something about this. So I set myself a personal goal. I said I want to come back in 5 years, but not as a tourist. I want to come back with something that can help my friends. So it's 3+ years, and when I was in Costa Rica over this last 2.5 months, working with primarily with the Nove population, who are also from Panama, but northern Panama. I looked down one day and I saw a young man sitting there with a beaded bracelet on. And I thought, damn man, that's Kuna. And I said, Kuna, see? And he said, see, mi Kuna. He had a t-shirt on that said Boca, Chiquita. He'd been picking bananas for Chiquita down in the Boca area and met some Nove and made friends and decided to come up and pick coffee. He'd come all the way up from the Cunayala. He's cooking on one of my stoves now. I'm getting pretty damn close. So that's it. That's my mission right there. I had begun doing all this like everybody now does. I had the bug, so I got online and I started pulling information offline, doing research. And I was freely experimenting. I can tell you all about carbon monoxide poisoning now. Because Tim, I think it was, who said, you know, the best way to test these stoves is to put your face over them. Yes, that is the best way to test those stoves. Some of them were disastrous failures in the first 6 months or so. But in doing that research, I learned about ethos, and I came for the first time 2 conferences ago. And at that conference, I met Dean Still from Approvecho. I met Dr. Paul Anderson, Dr. T. Ludd. I met all of these amazing people. And I went home after the first day, and I was just lit up. And I told my girlfriend, I'm doing the right, this is it. I'm on the path for the rest of my life. I want to do what these people are doing. I want what they've got. I want to have that feeling that they all seem to have of knowing that they're contributing something. For most of my adult life, my contribution has been to make beautiful things for rich people. It's been fun. I love making things, but it doesn't really mean anything to me anymore. This means something. And I am making beauty, and I am making meaning. It's my new medium.
No, it's we have a person like it's a native wild boar. Very good, thank you.
In both cases, the people that come to either Ethos or Stove Camp are very committed people, very much people who are interested in making a difference in the world in the area of cook stoves. And they're also very nice people. I was telling somebody earlier this week that at our stove camp, it's like, oh, you can use the hammer first. I'll wait until you're done. So people are very generous about working with each other and sharing things and sharing ideas that I don't think you get in normal society. Not as much, at least.
In my life, I did more than 100 expeditions, especially to remote areas in the Himalayas, in the Andes, in East Africa, also in New Guinea. And so I could see that in most simple communities, people are suffering under the smoke and under the impossibility to heat their houses, to heat their stoves. So what they do, they have a small house. Normally it's quite dark. There is no window, maybe a door. Mostly not either a chimney where the smoke could go out. And they are heating with wood, sometimes also wet wood. They are heating with yak dung in Tibet, for example. And they are living in these small, nasty houses with all this smoke. Many children are suffering. Also older people have eyes problems. The children are suffering generally in the lungs. And there we have many, many dead people for the fact that they are not able to have a technology which is able to give them clean air in their kitchens or in their houses, and the possibility to use their own resources. It means local wood and local yak dung. It's not the best thing to burn, but anyway they have it. It would be better to give them gas, but they don't have either the money to buy gas. And I think it would be a great achievement if we would be able in the West to help them with inventions for better cooking. There is the sun, there's a possibility to collect the energy from the sun and to cook maybe outside during the evening, during the day when the sun is shining. But they need also, especially in the high places, something in the upper places for the winter and for cooking. And there a stove which is using only a little bit of energy, whatever as the resources are. And a stove which is giving the minimum of smoke. And we have also to show them they have to have a technology, a logistic to bring the smoke out of the houses. I personally have a foundation helping local people in the Himalayas to survive generally. I am helping now a foundation in Nepal for a clinic where they give a lot of help for people they have bad eyes for the smoke, but this is only a secondary help. The first and main issue is the smoke which we take out of the houses, and the burner, the cooker, which is not producing so much smoke like up to the last years.
As a mechanical engineer, the thing that's always appealed to me about mechanical engineering is that I have opportunities to be creative. You have some sort of need and you have to figure out how to solve that need with using the laws of physics. One of my coworkers once said that people who are technical in this century are much like people who were chess masters a century ago, in the sense that science is like chess, in that there's a complex set of rules that you have to follow, but within that body of rules there's enormous room to be creative. So that's why I like engineering rather than, say, physics or mathematics. I found out about stoves because one of my fellow graduate students, when I was in graduate school in California in 1992 or 4, one of my fellow students ended up as part of this community, and we were exchanging emails in probably 2002. And I thought, well, that sounds like an interesting place to go and an interesting way to apply my creativity and knowledge. So I started. I remember I talked to Dean Still for the very first time on the night of Labor Day, that's an American holiday in September, Labor Day 2002. And I came out to basically here, Cottage Grove, Oregon, that fall in November, and started doing some stuff with stoves, and then soon realized that my skills were actually useful to the people in the stove community. I successfully did a project, and then I successfully did another project, and I successfully did one of the instruments that they still use in the lab there. I helped to develop that, so it was really, I was successful in using my skills to help what they were doing. In our last time interval of 10 minutes, we lost lost 21 grams of fuel, which is still a fairly high burning rate. So it is still burning. Of course, we can tell that from all the red glow.
When did we get to sort of like 93 or something, Dale?
We got to 93, at about, you can read, a little after 37 minutes. And again, that's a little after 30 minutes after we put the pot on. A little higher. Ooh. Hello.
Gotcha. But it seems like air, like if we just see where the embers are glowing, they seem to be glowing near here, and they seem to be glowing near the sides. Right, but then they won't necessarily be mixing. We'll have hot air, but not necessarily the CO mixing that we want.
Maybe. So the stove appears to be a bit warm. We're at 5 grams. Which is too much.
So what do you, is that...
Yeah, it's fairly warm.
Oh, well, or are we?
Probably.
So here we learn about how things work. And then we are prepared, and we empty our minds, and we walk into Haiti. And they tell us what to do, right? So it's always that they're the ones saying what should the super pot look like, what should the stove look like. If a fat white guy tries to make it here, yeah, I'll tell you, they're probably not going to like it.
We needed to study the emissions, the gases and the smoke. And Dale had gone to school, got a PhD with another woman, Dr. Tammy Bond. And so I called up Dale and I said, I don't know anything about the equipment that we need. Could you please help us? And it was amazing because Dale has spent years with us and has really been, for no money, helping to make this laboratory. So without Dale, this laboratory would not exist. I was a boat builder. I made boats, sailboats. And I met Dr. Larry Winiarski at Opera Vecchio in 1989. And I fell in love with the idea that you could make simple technology for low cost that would help poor people. And Larry is a dreamer. He's a professor. And I think he wanted someone who could make things. And so we became a very good team. He had the ideas, and I could make them.
This isn't going to be a short trip. I go around and around.
Yeah,
I just
that's
walk
what I was
around
thinking.
The jig, and you're going to just bend slowly to that.
First of all, I was a Boy Scout, and my mother cooked with wood, and we heated our house with wood up in northern Idaho and in northern Washington. And so I've always had a fascination with fire. And in Boy Scouts, you had to learn how to make a fire with minimal amount of matches, kind of on a survival thing. In 1975, approximately, there was a time when the Arabs embargoed the oil, so the United States didn't get any oil for 2 weeks, and they panicked. And so I remembered that there was a time that I had read about where people actually ran their cars on wood or coal or charcoal. And so I started researching that and developing what I thought would be a way to use the waste material around here, this straw and agricultural waste. And I developed some large-scale technology, prototypes to reinvent this technology. But then my wife, who's an engineer, died, and I had 3 young sons to raise. My job was ending, and I didn't know what to do. So I kind of made a bargain with the Lord that if He could get me through this, I wouldn't really work just for money. I would try to find something that was worthwhile to do. And I met with Applicazioni, and they had a reputation for doing stove work around the world. I have a background in mechanical engineering, actually a PhD, but I've always liked to work with my hands, and there was this need for better combustion, more efficient stoves, and so I set a goal to try to come up with a system that could be used all over the world with local materials where people could make their own stove to fit into whatever niche was necessary. And so I came up with, I call my 10 commandments of stoves, 10 principles, that if you follow these principles, you can make a stove that will work quite well, and it will burn just about anything that's dry if you know the tricks. And so I started teaching that to the people in Applicazioni, and they started publishing. And then we eventually, after about 15 years, we started getting people seriously interested, and it has spread all around the world. And the generic stove is called the rocket stove. I try to distinguish it from a gasifier stove as in that we try to burn the fuel completely. We don't want to leave any carbon behind. We want to get all the energy we can out of. You can do both ways. You can try a gasification, which is what they used during the Second World War to drive cars. And I've done that. I've actually driven my 65 Ford on wood gas.
One of the problems that Peter Scott had with cooking the injera was that you needed very even cooking surface. And because he was using an aluminum metad, which was great for heating up, because aluminum is a very good conductor for the heat, but it would heat up too rapidly and then burn the metad or not cook it evenly enough. So I sent Peter and Dale pictures of my metal foam cookware, and I said, would this be helpful to you? And they, like every engineer, said, well, this is counterintuitive, because it should be an insulator, actually, and not transfer the heat properly. But in fact, the metal foam spreads the heat very evenly. I sent Dale some metal foam samples, and he tested them and so on. And now we're going to test the injera cooking here, and that's why I'm here today. We're going to test the, Peter is making up some injera, which is the Ethiopian pancake. That's a special pancake that's made from teff, which is a grain that is in Ethiopia. And so it's very important that these cook stoves, that these rocket stoves that they're making, use a metad that cooks very evenly. So I tried it in my local Ethiopian restaurant on McDougal Street in Manhattan, and the Ethiopian chef there loves it. In fact, I gave him a metad of metal foam, and he won't give it back to me. There used to be a tradition of manufacturers and scientists asking or collaborating with artists and designers to find different applications for materials, or what's called unobvious applications for materials. And those kind of collaborations happened a lot after World War II. They happened in Italy, they happened in America, they happened all over the world. So it was really a collaboration between engineers, and I consider myself a designer or an artist, and that collaboration arrived at an obvious application that really does work very well. And those kind of collaborations happened a lot in the 40s. But now we have all of our corporations segmented. The design is here, the engineering is here, and the marketing is there, and you know, nobody's talking to anybody. Like this morning, you know, those conversations arrive at ideas. Because you show somebody one idea, and then somebody has another idea, and you know, and it's collaboration, it's cooperation. Not, I think corporations now, they have this competition going on between divisions of corporations. You know, it should be more like a collaborative competition, you know, or something like that.
No, I think this is a pretty concentrated heat source in there, so that's...
Dale comes more from the academic background. You know, do theory and do testing, and I come from more of the hands-on. Sometimes we have different ideas about what's really important in the stove, but this is typical in in engineering circles. Yeah, so he's a very hard worker, and he's actually fairly humble and presenting what he believes, and he's very humorous in a kind of a dry humor sort of way.
We're looking at different types of fuels and different options for it because we don't want to be cutting down stick wood, okay? The deforestation problem. The people cut the trees and they leave the little stuff behind. And they want pieces as big as your arm, okay? Or big trunks, and they chop them up and so they kill the tree. Our stove, the gasifier stoves, use particles and small pieces the size of a finger or chips. And we also are going to use rice husks, show you some of those types of things also. So we want to get these stoves in the hands of people who could utilize them. I am driven by the need for this technology to reach the third world countries. It is not going to be a common item in an American or Italian home. It can be used for your backyard barbecues and cooking and some of that type of thing, but it's not there. Now, if we're taking the cuttings from the vineyards and we're pyrolyzing those and getting the biochar, and maybe we use the heat in order to heat hot water that's going to be used for the school's hot water supply or something. But we're not trying to make electricity. We're not trying to do the big projects. We'd rather do things which are in the neighborhood of $10, $50, $100, maybe $1,000, but not $1 million. It's easy to have things made which are gigantic and get a lot of engineers and they make it big, but then you have to transport all the fuel to it and stuff. This is to be decentralized. It is to be located in each household and in the villages. The people who make the biochar, they're going to use it in their local fields and stuff like that. The health is an advantage in the household right there. That's the motivation for doing it. And this is why I come to Stove Camp. And I drive in every year. It takes me 40 hours of driving to come from Illinois.
Well, there's some rise a little bit. It's got to hold the pot. It's the pot, not the red. No. Push it together. There it is. Okay.
I am a geography professor, university level. Lots of things internationally and overseas and things like that. Very interested in third world countries and all of that. In the year 2001, a cousin of Dr. Thomas Reed, who is my friend, said, "Come and meet my cousin Tom. He's as weird as you are." And I took that as a compliment. Okay, I'm weird, whatever.
So I became Dr. Reed's disciple. I'm following on. I was enthused about it. I had a chance to live in Mozambique for a couple years as a Fulbright professor and a Rotary University teacher grantee. And so I was doing some projects there. And then I retired at the end of 2003. Since that time, I have been full-time on cook stoves. My wife probably says more than I should be, but that's beside the point, okay? It's a worthwhile effort. For many years, I was sort of the lone wolf at the meetings and showing in different kinds of stuff. But Dale got in and he helped me get some of that data that needed to be done, confirmation of the types of things that we were doing, repeating it over and over. So what we're trying to do is have everybody test the different ideas, and we appreciate the ability to do measurement, scientific testing here at Approvecho. This is where the facilities are working.
No, I don't. Oh, no. No, not going there. She's a dog person.
And I had been living in Mexico, and so we took a lot of the stoves and the ovens to small villages in Mexico, and the women would cry because it saved so much fuel, the oven. They wouldn't have to walk anymore in the desert searching for fuel. And I remember one woman who made pastry, and she would sell it on the road. When we made her a new oven, she just broke down and cried and just thanked Larry so much for bringing this new technology to her. And so those kind of experiences were very important to me, but also really it's probably because stoves and generally things that poor people use, there's not much scientific investigation about those problems. People investigate how can they sell stuff to the rich. And so I think it takes a humanitarian operation like this, a laboratory, to really try to solve the problems of the poor. And that takes as much science as making solutions for problems of the rich.
Now you are wonderful, even with your American English, no problem. No problem at all. Thank you.
People didn't have trouble understanding me.
You got me contaminating the food.
Let me know when it's done, I'll bring the bowl. Let me know when it's done and I'll bring the bowl.
Okay. Well, just, okay.
About half of the world's people use biomass, that is wood, charcoal, corn stalks, or animal dung for their cooking, and it tends to be very inefficient and also very highly polluting. People who cook indoors are subject to a lot of smoke and carbon monoxide, and it has been estimated that something like 1.5 million people a year die from breathing the smoke. And then also they're cutting down the forests at a very rapid rate to get wood largely for cooking. So we here in America tend to concentrate on making stoves that are clean and efficient, and we've succeeded to some extent. But obviously the people who use the stoves are also interested in, is it easy to light? Is it safe? Does a spark leap out of the stove and catch somebody's skirt on fire? Which hopefully not, but that can happen. So, we in America concentrate on cleanliness, efficiency, and safety, while the people in the developing world also need ease of use, ease of lighting. Do you have to fuss with the wood every 5 minutes, or can you just let it sit and run itself for an hour? So a good stove really needs to be good in all these areas, which is quite a difficult challenge, in addition to, of course, being not very expensive.
It's a very dedicated group of very technologically minded people who want their problem solving to be applied to real world needs. Techies love solving problems, and these techies enjoy each other's company. As a young woman, I wanted to live off the grid. I wanted to know how to live without electricity, without running water, without a telephone, and I did that for 3 years in the mountains. I do not recommend it. But since then, sometimes I just get a passion for understanding how to do things simpler, because we're so accustomed to resource extraction. American society is very wasteful, and I know things can be done more simply. So lately I've gotten obsessed. I'm obsessed with small kitchen appliances that can do many things. Things that can do many things, a wood stove, a chimney. I pay attention to waste heat, and I think that the heat should not be wasted. So it's a personal obsession, and I learned that the camp was here, and I decided, stop being obsessed, just go do something and help. This is a very new country. It's very rich in resources, and we've used it up. People are not accustomed to working with scarcity. So I think we need to change our own kitchens. 3 winters in Maine, which is a very cold place in the northern Atlantic. The worst thing is social isolation. But we could live. I had a wood cook stove. I had an outside outhouse, right, a privy. Best tasting water I ever had, right? But I learned a lot. I had a wood cook stove. I had a sink with a bucket in front of it with a spigot so I could rinse. I still wash dishes differently because of that experience. I know how to use the water to both rinse and wash at the same time. This represents a range hood in which a burner, I would love to see this one power this, is placed in an opening without a door. The exhaust should go through the outer circles with a large enough area to take advantage of the amount of draft available.
Can I say something about fuels?
Sure.
Again, if you can regulate your primary air, you can extend the range of fuels you can use, because with proper primary air regulation, you can force a lot of air through some pretty weird stuff.
In my village, there's so much wind that it's just too hard to cook outside. And it leads to an amount of smoke that's just, it's unbelievable. Like, when I went into the kitchen, or even if I had a Senegalese man go into the kitchen, after 4 or 5 seconds, it just becomes too much, the smoke, and, you know, you have to go out, so. The women are the ones who have to collect wood, and they chop wood too, which is, I always thought funny. They like it if they can save wood. The relation isn't clear, but there was all these reasons that they really liked the stove, because the smoke, it was making them hot, it was making them sweat, which they didn't like, and then it was dirtying their clothes. So if they cooked with a nice stove, then they didn't have to change into bad clothing before they cooked, and they could just wear their nice clothes. And so there are all these reasons. It was sort of cool, and for me, whatever works is great. I mean, the end result will be the same, plus there are all these other quality of life issues that it addresses, so it's really cool. I think it's really cool to be here because I think most people aren't even sort of aware of this issue. And then here, like, there are all these people who are just super enthusiastic. It's really exciting. And then also it's just cool that I like it that where I was talking about these stoves, and I think people were starting to think, you know, or their faces looked like they were thinking, oh, shut up already. And then you come here and everyone's like so into it. I mean, not just because I was just talking to death about this thing that I just learned, and it was just, it makes so much sense, and so it's exciting to be here.
Normally, you make charcoal in the rural areas. You cut down a live tree.
Oh yeah, I've seen them make it. Yeah,
you transport that into the urban areas as fuel, and it becomes fuel, cooking fuel.
And about a 60% conversion loss.
Said 70.
Yeah, 70.
In Malawi, we calculate 90%. Because they don't even use the branches, because you can only use the trunky,
right.
At least that size.
Yeah.
So this stove is now designed, right?
Yeah.
In my life, it started all that I went to Malawi in '97, and I started to work in a food security project that was commissioned by the German government to be implemented by the German Technical Corporation, GTZ. And I was working as an administrator, logistician, whatsoever. I did all sorts of things. And we had an integrated food security program that was also dealing with lots of different sectors. So this whole thing of food and fuel became such an important topic in our life that later on we switched from food security to energy security. And energy security in a poor African household basically means cooking energy security. So when we left Malawi in 2008, I set myself some targets because I became a freelance consultant. So I didn't have a paid job any longer. And so I wanted to learn more about certain topics. And one of the big topics that I had always been hearing about and I wanted to learn more was gasification. How do you burn that type of biomass that is small, too small to be burned in a conventional stove, but that is still in some areas widely available and abundant. Like pine cones, like rice husks, although there you need a special adapted thing. Sawdust, you also need a little bit of specially adapted stove because you need to put this air through that. But you have a lot of wood chips, you have a lot of corn cobs, you have got a lot of agricultural waste like the nutshells, the coffee husks, the coffee shells. In various areas, wherever you grow an abundant crop as a cash crop, you have residues, one sort of the other. And so very often those residues, they are just heaped up. Like you go to West Africa and you see all these groundnut shells, peanut shells, heaped up and piled up, and then they start igniting by themselves because there's microbial activity and it's like a haystack that just sets fire. And so these things, they are just smoldering away and they are polluting, and it's a fuel source, but how to make use of this fuel? So that is one thing that I started learning about, and I'm still learning a lot about it.
Well, I've been doing stove work since 1997. So I've been doing stove projects in Central America and in Africa. And so there wasn't a moment when Dale and I met and suddenly fireworks went off and said, well, my God, we have to like save the world together. But I think slowly over time, I've realized that Dale can really help with my projects, and that Dale really, I think, likes the fact that I can go out and build things in the field. So for example, last year, we worked on a food dryer together. And so I think it was last November where Dale just did a sketch on the back of a piece of paper, which I ended up building, and it was a spectacularly efficient food dryer. So I think it's interesting in the stove world because there isn't a real connection between sort of ivory tower research, PhDs, and people on the ground. There's a real disconnect. So there's people who are in the field who don't really understand combustion, they don't understand heat transfer, and if they do, they're not able to actually get it built. So somehow there's this connection between Dale and I that works, that I'm able to take all of his research and try to apply it. And then also there's reciprocal, whereas, well, I can test his ideas, and if they don't work, then that can feed information back into the system.
So nobody can be an expert in everything, so I know certain things very well, and Peter knows other things very well, and other people, the way it frequently happens is somebody will suggest an idea, such as for the fruit dryer, it was, how about if we put a fan in the fruit dryer to circulate the air? And I could tell right away that that was a good idea, so mostly I just said, yes, yes, that's a good idea, you should go ahead with that, and that was most of what I really did. So it's kind of...
Well, no, it was more than that. The idea of not having, well, I don't know how technical we want to get, but the idea of recirculating the air as opposed to having the air running through the system.
Yes, which is mostly just putting a fan in the system. So, but anyway, so I at least provided a lot of encouragement, and it ended up working out very well. In that you reduced the fuel consumption by, what was it, 90%, something like that?
Yeah, we went down from the baseline to about 90% savings. Yeah.
And that's the kind of things, that's the kind of savings that are possible in these low-tech third-world devices that are not at all optimized. So it's often fairly easy to save large percentages of fuel. So it's not going from 50% efficiency to 55% efficiency. It's really the spectacular savings that one can gain from a system that didn't start out very well.
And so,
Provecho tests stoves, all kinds of stoves. And so here we have a chance to actually get some very scientific data on, what our stoves are doing. And and how effective they are, and just a lot of fun.
I was wandering through China, and I found a place where traditionally, for 600 years, people had been making the world's best stoves. So I went to the biggest factory in that area, then taught them the design to make this stove designed by Dr. Larry Winiarski. And so the factory invested $1 million US in making these stoves. And now we sell 100,000 of these stoves at cost around the world to projects, to stove projects. And the Prince of Wales gave us this prize, and it's helped to make new products, and it's helped us to do more research. And, you know, also meeting Prince Charles, I was very impressed with him. He has the largest organic farm in the United Kingdom. He has been following stoves. He's been thinking about stoves for 30 years. One of my goals is to make a wood stove that's as clean as natural gas. And then I want to send that to Prince Charles and tell him it's because he inspired me so much that Approvecho really wants to double our efforts to help poor people not breathe smoke and not use too much wood.
In a distance between the pot and another piece of the stove, 1 millimeter variation could affect performance by 20%. It's very important in stove building to be very precise. My wife and I bought this property 5 years ago. No, it's an old industrial property, and it was a bunch of rundown buildings. Some of in the facility that Approvecho is in now, the roofs were actually collapsed. It had been abandoned for years. And I knew Approvecho was in Cottage Grove. In fact, 30 years ago, I did a project in Central America using one of the earliest Approvecho stove designs on my project. And one of the reasons I moved to this town was I knew Approvecho was here, and I knew these people were here doing this work. So I had no intention of building this place for them, but it just so happened that mutual friends sent Dean Still, the director of Approvecho, to me just as I was finishing up that big building, and it was available for rent. And Dean had been dreaming of a place by the river where we could do this work, and space to do Stove Camp and to do this work. So they moved in. I fell in love with them all, and 6 months later, I got drawn into this stove project, and after 40 years as a carpenter and builder now, I'm a stove builder. So I like to use a fiberglass hammer on this, and I just kind of worry around the edges, and this thing is kind of... We've developed a stove in Uganda in real field conditions, and want to be able to build a stove in the developing world. And for the last several years, we've been developing the set of tools and jigs to enable people in the developing world to manufacture this stove to very tight 1 millimeter tolerances, and yet do it with local labor.
This camp was excellent for our work, for myself. There's a lot of networking we have done. We have seen finished products which are using extremely low amount of fuel, but much more important, you can make them with the skills, the tools and the materials available in many African countries. For Uganda, I can say I can do them there. Dean has a great vision of how stoves can move forward, and I'm not in that lucky position to only concentrate on one stove type or on one topic. I have to coordinate a lot, but I have now the ability to meet people here, to connect people I know from Africa, to connect together. The very positive thing at this camp is that all the people here were extremely helpful and willing to help. And that is something that's very seldom you find and see. And I hope that we will be able to start thinking also about how do we get these stoves to the people. Hopefully starting to manufacture them in these countries in the regions, create jobs there. The distribution between poor and rich is critical. You have in Uganda people who have and earn a lot of money. You have very big, very new cars, and then you have people who are not even able to afford themselves a bicycle. And we have a lot of unstable countries, like I used to work in Southern Sudan as well, while I was based in Uganda. And I actually went there before the war officially was finished, or peace papers were signed. So you have a lot of instability, you have a lot of movement, you have people who are very worried about their lives, which start moving around, going like in Uganda you have refugee camps from some Rwandans, we have South Sudanese who are basically living there, and a refugee camp is they're sometimes permanent, they're 20, 30 years there, so you have at least one, if not two generations being born outside their own country.
For the last 12 years, I've had a studio.
My father's mother from Corridor comes from a place where they build stoves. I've seen photographs of very beautiful and artistic stoves used for heating, which of course are different from the small stoves that we build here for simply cooking. But I was not aware that I had sort of a somewhat of an ancestral connection to stoves.
Oh, you're so good. Oh, that does look good. Okay, put it back in. Okay, the riser fell. Yeah, put it back in.
My job, the job for which I get paid in Ohio, is that I work for a consulting engineering firm. There's really no connection between that firm and the cook stove work, so I do the cook stove work in my spare time, though my company allows me to use company resources and instruments and laboratory facilities, which is a big help. Certainly this stove work is the most interesting part of my work as a mechanical engineer, partly because it offers me the opportunity to be creative, and partly because it's very fulfilling both personally and professionally. I don't know quite how to say this, but it's, I think, best not to take this work, in other words, the work we try to do for people who really need help, I think it's best not to take that work too seriously. Otherwise, when things go wrong, it's just too upsetting. So I've learned to do the work seriously, but at the same time not be attached to how the outcome goes, so that when things go badly, which is actually most of the time, I don't get too frustrated or discouraged. The number of days in which things really, really go well is actually very few, but that's what makes the whole thing move forward. before this time, and I was interested in going again, but much like my grandmother, I need a lot of encouragement to travel away from home. But when the opportunity to come here to Italy and participate in a number of stove events came up, and as well as seeing Italy and being chauffeured around as though I were the president, and meet some of my relatives, that just was an opportunity that was too good to pass up. So I've now been here in Europe for almost 2 weeks, and this has really been the high point of my life, being the center of a lot of attention and really being treated as if I were the president.
Per intanto, benvenuto a Castelfranco.
So, welcome in Castelfranco.
Good to be here. In America, not all families really make much of an effort to know something about their ancestors. So they might know something about their parents, but they may or may not even have much of a relationship with their grandparents. But in my family, it was always important to know your relatives, your older relatives, and what was at least some of the story of their lives and their struggles and what they did and what they thought was important. So I'm very pleased that I got the chance to come here, and very, very, very pleased to I'm very pleased to have gotten the chance to explore my roots and learn more about my ancestors, of course, ones that died long before I came along. But I've just been very, very pleased to do that, and I know that my deceased relatives would be very pleased to know that I was here, and my living relatives will be very pleased to hear the story of how I met people who knew my grandmother's sister, or how I met my cousins.
Quindi noi siamo orgogliosi di questo personaggio che ha dato un contributo anche al cambiamento di alcune situazioni di emergenza nel mondo, sia di origini non che Trentine. Era lui stesso nella relazione che farà nella giornata di sabato, dirà e spiegherà, illustrerà anche con delle immagini quello che sta facendo negli Stati Uniti a favore delle popolazioni del terzo mondo.
I have it in my pocket. So the basic idea here is that water does not need to be boiled to kill the germs and viruses within the water. It only needs to be heated to about 65 degrees C. That's called pasteurizing, and of course we know that milk is pasteurized and various other beverages. But the question is, how do you know when the water has been pasteurized? You don't have a thermometer, you can't see it boiling, etc. So in 1992 I was asked to develop a water pasteurization indicator, or WAPI as it's usually called, and some ideas that people had had before me that helped get me started. So in a surprisingly short amount of time, about 3 months and about 40 hours of work, I came up with this device, which is a sealed plastic tube with a slug of soybean fat in one end. And if it melts, if the fat melts, then you know the water reached the right temperature, and when you pull the thing out of the water when you're done, if the fat is at the bottom end, then you know that it melted, therefore the water is pasteurized. And if it stays at the top, then you know it did not melt. The advantage, this is truly an indicator rather than a thermometer, because you can set this out in the morning. It's designed for water heated by the sun, but it doesn't have to be heated by the sun. You can set this in the water, go away, let the water heat up, and then come back later after the water's cooled down and you still have your indicator. And then if you want to reuse it, you would just flip it over and reuse it again. So something like 200,000 of these things have been built since 1992, so this is my most successful project up to now.
Dale Andreatta è un personaggio anche molto restio da quello che abbiamo potuto vedere, nel senso le sue è molto umile, e se gli si dice caspita hai fatto qualche cosa di eccezionale, dice io non ho fatto niente, com'è nel tipico dei nonni.
I spend a lot of my time and my mental energy thinking of ways to help people in the developing world, that is, people who are very, very poor. And spending my energy that way is, I think, the best life that I can imagine for myself. So it's a privilege to be here, and it's a privilege to work on stoves, and I'm very pleased to be here. Grazie. cooking stoves, not heating stoves, but cooking stoves for people in the developing world. Cooking stoves are very different from heating stoves. They are small, they heat up quickly, and then they cool down quickly. When concentrated, white smoke can burn very clearly. And that's the demonstration I'm going to try to do here. So if you didn't see that, the candle, I held the lighter about 5 centimeters above the wick. I lit the smoke and the fire traveled down the smoke trail about 2 centimeters to the wick, relighting the wick.
I see you pay a lot of attention doing the things. That's why I said.
So all 4 of my grandparents come from Trentino. My father's father comes from a town called Seguinzano. My father's mother comes from a town called Corrido. My mother's mother comes from Val di Non, and I think my mother's father comes from the same region. I don't know as much about my mother's family as I do about my father's family, but I know that much. My father's parents ended up moving to the town of Uriksville, which is my hometown, and my mother's parents were living about 4 miles north in the town of Midvale. And in that area, at least in Uriksville, there are actually a lot of northern Italians, who of course tended to get close to each other since they had a common language and everything. So my mother's parents and my father's parents were friends. And my parents knew each other from the time they were children. My bisnonno, Giovanni, went to Colorado also, 1890 maybe, and my grandfather was born there, let's see, mio nonno è nato in Colorado in 1894, poi 2 anni they moved back to Seguinzano.
Pensate, infatti lì in Colorado c'erano e ci sono ancora molti di Seguinzano. Questo secondo me è molto importante per lei perché racconta cosa erano il cibo, cosa era cose da mangiare fatte dai nostri nonni. Quindi qui ci sono proprio delle ricette, come era nel 1800, delle ricette fatte dai nonni con i bambini della scuola. Sì, questo è molto bene. La mosa.
Mosa. I miei nonni mangiano mosa.
Ecco.
Mangiavano. Mangiano. Mosa. Mosa. Yes.
Yeah. Mosa, panada, sono tutti i nomi che ricorderà storici dei suoi nonni, brusà, sono proprio degli alimenti tipici di Seguinzano fatti. La cosa bella è che questi sono stati fatti con i nonni e i bambini. Menestra de Horst, tutte le varie cose. Sono diverse ricette, secondo me anche molto buone, il canederli in brodo.
Sì, I have eaten many times. Io mangio molti.
Spesso, qualche volta canederli, gnocchi di patate.
Sì, gnocchi.
E tante cose, gnocchi de pan. E in fondo trova invece un piccolo glossario con i nomi delle cose. Padella de fer, piat, pignata, tabiel, tutte le varie cose in dialetto di Seguinzano.
He and my grandmother had the tradition that every Sunday they would make polenta for Sunday dinner. My grandfather would make the polenta, and it came out exactly the same every time. Other people in my family, the younger generations, do still make polenta, not every Sunday, however, and when we make it, sometimes it's too soft, sometimes it's a little too hard, but my grandfather's polenta was always the same.
perché il campo aveva la vigna, diciamo, sul contorno, perché all'interno si coltivava il grano, il frumento, si coltivava il mais, quindi era polenta, come si dice qui i nostri nonni, colazione, pranzo e cena. Cioè,
Breakfast, lunch and dinner, polenta.
Both my grandfather and my father made wine most of their lives, or all of their lives. My father is 92 now, almost 93, and he still makes wine. My grandfather made wine up until, the very last years of his life. My grandfather would get actual grapes and then stomp the grapes with some rubber boots. Well, usually the grandchildren did the stomping, but they would stomp the grapes with rubber boots, and he had some rubber boots in the basement that he kept just for stomping the grapes.
Quello che rimaneva del prodotto uva poi veniva distillato per fare la grappa.
In the 1920s in America was a time called Prohibition, and I'm not clear about the laws, whether it was illegal to make alcohol or to sell it or whatever, but you kind of had to sneak around. And in my hometown, there were a number of people of Northern Italian descent who had sort of clustered there, and many of them liked to make wine, as my grandfather did. So the story that I heard recently was that every year they would get a boxcar load of grapes on the train, and then the men who worked in the railroad would sort of smuggle the boxcar back behind the warehouse where no one could see, and then that night the men would come over and collect however many grapes they had ordered. The story goes that my grandfather ordered 200 pounds of grapes every year, from which he would make his wine for the year.
Quindi qui poi c'è l'ebollizione, i vapori salgono, qui c'è una camera di raffreddamento con l'acqua, quindi si raffreddano, qui ancora, oppure meglio si condensano in questa camera, qui dentro poi vediamo se si apre. Dovrebbe aprirsi perché c'è la serpentina. No, è saldato. Qui dentro c'è una serpentina. C'è una serpentina con l'acqua e quindi poi si raffredda l'acqua e qui scende l'acqua. La grappa. La Valle di Cembra, 850 distillerie, di cui 3 regolari. Qui non è Far West, è Far Est questo. Come tutte le frazioni di Scegonzano, che sono 15, un tempo, ai tempi nell'800, quindi erano delle frazioni quasi autonome, quindi con la propria chiesa, con la propria scuola, con la fontana, con le cose, e vi abitavano molte persone. Anche Quaras, dai libri storici che ha scritto il professor Antonelli, contava più di 100 persone. Oggi, con i tempi moderni, a Quaras vivono stanziali 4 persone. Gli abitanti di Quaras li chiamano gli asini, perché avevano spesso questo asino che usavano come mezzo di lavoro.
My father's Italian name was Corrado Dominic Andreatta. Conrad he became in America, or usually he just ended up being called Andy, for Andy Andreatta.
Viene dall'Ohio e lei è parente dagli Stati Uniti.
Non conoscendo però.
Ah, ma adesso che avviene l'albero genealogico.
Parlate l'italiano?
Un po' di italiano.
Il dialetto? Un po' di dialetto?
No, dialetto non.
No. Peccato. Allora, francese?
No.
No. Aspetta.
Lei è stata molti anni.
23 anni
in Belgio.
Sì.
Quindi conosce.
Parlo francese. Allora. Che dici? Come va la vita?
Va bene.
Va bene.
Piacere. Piacere.
Piacere. Andreatta.
Sì, Dale.
Piacere.
Piacere.
E Andreatta Olivo,
E Andreatta.
Che è scritto anche nell'albero.
E lei e lui è
Andreatta.
Dale
Andreatta.
Dale, di nome, Andreatta, il cognome?
E cognome? E nome?
Dale.
Sì. Mio padre è Lino, degli Stati Uniti. Mio nonno è Corrado.
Corrado? Corrado Andreatta.
Corrado?
Qui.
Sì.
mio bisnonno è Giovanni.
Ma Giovanni è quello che è caduto là al Capitolo ora. Non è Domenico. Mio nonno era Domenico, il marito della mia nonna. Domenico era maestro, per esempio, non era un asino, no. Però ci hanno messo sul nome così perché è venuto su senza riposare. Stiani. Questa persona portava su 50 kg di roba sulla spalla senza riposare, le davano un bel dono. E allora è per quello che è arrivato fin qui senza riposarsi e ci hanno messo i nomi asini. Non so cosa le davano, ma le davano qualcosa da mangiare.
My grandfather, my grandparents were married in 1914, and some time later my grandfather lost his job because he went to a union meeting. So they headed east on the train. They were going to go to Pennsylvania, which was 2,500 kilometers or so, but when they got to Ohio, 2,200 kilometers away, my grandfather got off the train and he heard some people speaking the dialect. So he said, "Are there jobs here?" They said, "Yes, there are jobs in the mines." My grandfather said, "I'm a coal miner," and he got on the train, got my grandmother, they got off the train and stayed there.
Ma è vero che a Denver, non so dove, c'è un paesino che si chiama Andreatta?
Oh, do you know if there's a village called Andreatta somewhere in maybe close to Denver? Is it Colorado? Is it?
Colorado. Denver is in Colorado. I'm pretty sure there is no town called Andreatta.
No, perché mio cugino da Piasso, Antonelli Silvio, è morto in America, da Piasso, che sua mamma era la sorella di mio papà qui. La mamma di questo Silvio era di qui da Quaras. È andata anche lei in America, dopo è rivenuta e il figlio, visto che poteva partire perché era nato in America, è partito in America ma è morto là.
Chi è che abita a Quaras oggi?
Io.
L'olivo e dopo?
Io l'olivo.
Basta, 2 oggi fissi. Lei è qua l'estate?
L'estate, no, mi aspetto la morte qua, signor sindaco.
Beh, ma non la vengo qua la morte, non sa neanche che è il posto?
Sì, la sa.
No,
non la sanno, la sanno. Sì, la sanno.
Qui che lo trovo, però ovviamente un po'.
Quando calabate dirò avanti, voglio andare a trovare mio marito. Sono stata insieme a 80 anni, sapete? Tra morosi e sposati 64.
Ah, che era il trucco, tra morosi.
Siamo stati veramente, siamo stati veramente felici. Anche siamo andati all'estero e abbiamo sofferto, però l'amore è stato sempre la prima.
They did not meet each other until they both came to America, and they met in the town of Superior, Wyoming. They were married on January 31st, 1914. And I think the story is they walked 10 miles down the railroad in the middle of the winter to get married in the bigger city of Rock Springs and then walked 10 miles back to Superior.
When he's died?
I do not.
Because 1852.
Ah.
It's around 50 years of age.
52?
Yes.
Dunque, Eugenio Giovanni è figlio di Andreatta Domenico, l'uno, e quello dell'84, dov'è? Andreatta Attilio, anche lui figlio di Domenico.
Di Domenico, sì.
E di Domenica, per cui corrispondono praticamente sia il padre che la madre.
Ecco, dopo volevo lasciarle ancora un ricordo simpatico. Ecco, una targhetta con lo stemma di Seguzzano, quindi così gli rimane...
Grazie, molto grazie.
Volentieri. Quindi questo è proprio il nostro simbolo del comune, insomma.
My grandmother, that is my father's mother, comes from Corridor. When we went to Corridor, we found quite a number of the birth records of her sisters and brothers and some records of her parents' names and her grandparents' names as well. And also a wonderful book that was put together, putting together the whole Zandran tree, that was her maiden name, all the way back to about 1520. So that's, I don't know, something like 10 generations removed from me. So my grandmother, and actually my grandfather too, were both born in 1894.
I don't know the exact date, but I believe they both left in about 1912, when they would have been perhaps 17 years old or so. They come from different valleys within Trentino, so according to family history, when they met, they could not understand each other's speaking. So each thought the other was speaking English, and they had trouble understanding each other at first.
Everything went well?
Molto bene, molto avventurismo.
Oh, cioè avventuroso?
Ok.
That's fine.
Buongiorno. Buongiorno. Tutto bene?
Sì.
Sono contento di averla qui tra di noi, che sia venuto qui nel Trentino e sia venuto a Cordo, da dove sono partiti i suoi familiari sostanzialmente.
E dopo abbiamo pensato di darle un omaggio del comune di Cordo col santuario di San Romino.
The story I heard from my family is that she went to America to work in her brother's saloon. It was in Superior, Wyoming, which is near Rock Springs, which was a coal mining town which provided coal for trains on the Union Pacific Railroad.
My grandmother would, as part of her employment, she worked at the saloon and she would dance with the men for 5 cents or something like that.
My grandmother was a very shy and timid woman. I imagine it took quite a bit to encourage her to leave her home and cross the ocean. And I'm sure she only went because she, I think, went with one brother and to join up with another brother who owned the saloon in Superior.
Questo è il primo acquedotto che è stato costruito in pietra locale. Questo, ogni famiglia doveva produrre il proprio pezzo così lungo. Adesso questo è un reparto che penso sia importante per tutti noi del posto, ma anche per il signor Andreatta. Ricorderà sicuramente le sue origini. Questo è il settore, piccolo settore dell'emigrazione. Anche Corredo è stato toccato da questo forte capitolo della storia, fine 800, inizio 900. Le destinazioni principalmente erano 3, Stati Uniti d'America, Argentina e Australia. Questo era mio prozio, è partito povero contadino da questo paese e è riuscito a comprare un grande negozio di alimentare che tuttora esiste in Wisconsin, una catena di alimentari.
Nell'archivio storico della parrocchia Antica Pieve Ritrovamento Santa Croce di Corredo, dopo alcune ricerche, grazie anche alla consulenza del professor Ferruccio Romagna, abbiamo trovato qualcosa riguardo agli antenati dell'ingegnere Dale Andreatta, non molto per la verità, comunque abbastanza, nel senso che abbiamo trovato il documento, ecco, nel registro dei nati e battezzati, ecco, che vanno dal 1821 al 1924. Abbiamo trovato a pagina 215, vediamo se lo troviamo, 215, ecco, sono libri un po' fragili, ecco qua, ecco, pagina 215, ecco, troviamo nell'anno 1894, ecco qui verso la fine della pagina, la nonna proprio dell'ingegnere Dale Andreatta, che era una certa Zandron Emma, che è nata il 6 aprile, anzi il 26 aprile, alle ore 6, antimeridiane, si segnava sempre anche l'ora del giorno, battezzata anche lo stesso giorno come si usava una volta, battezzata sempre il 26 aprile 1894, la quale aveva come genitori Giuseppe Del Fu Francesco e Battocletti Francesca. Quindi abbiamo ricostruito anche, ecco, un po' la discendenza, mentre la madre era una certa Pollini Teresa, del Fu Simone e Tavonatti Angela. Poi è sempre segnalato anche il ministro battezzante, era un certo Don Sicker Emanuele, cooperatore, che allora c'era il Pievano e poi c'erano 2 cooperatori di sostegno. E poi infine i patrini, come si diceva una volta, ecco, sono Pollini Eugenio e Rizzardi Emma. Ecco, la scrittura è abbastanza leggibile, entrambi contadini, si segnalava sempre anche la professione, no? Ecco, questi sono i dati segnalati qui. Ecco, altre annotazioni non ci sono. Ecco, sarebbe stato interessante trovare la data, ecco, l'anno dell'eventuale migrazione, ma non è segnalata. Abbiamo trovato su altri registri, abbiamo cercato in diverse altre fonti, ma non abbiamo ricostruito fino ad ora altre notizie. Ecco, comunque è già importante aver trovato una nonna.
Molto grazie.
Grazie. Intanto buone ricerche e buon lavoro nel suo campo importante.
Come tutti i nonni, sei uomo di pochissime parole, ma se vuole dire 2 parole, naturalmente siamo anche
Well, my parents and my father's parents lived on the same street. So when I was a small boy, my parents would often leave me at my grandparents' house just for a few hours. And this was in the late 1960s, and sometimes we would watch the news on television. In the 1960s, the news was fighting in Vietnam and fighting in the Middle East. So my grandmother would watch this, and she would say, in English, but with her Italian accent, "I don't understand why these people got to do these terrible things to each other." So I believe the day may come when people don't fight, and if that happens, it will be because everyone has a level of prosperity. So my work to help people in developing countries is partly that someday perhaps we will not need to fight over this, that, and the other, and that someday we may fight with our neighbor, but war will be no more. Grazie.
Buongiorno. Sì, so. It's an Italian form to kissing is a Italian form to
greet someone,
yes,
usually of the opposite sex.
Yes, we use it very often.
Yes, that's different from America.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know as much about my mother's side of the family, the Kirschbaumer side, but what I know mostly comes from a beautiful family tree that was drawn, I don't know, in 1984 or something. It's full of information, and it's also very beautifully drawn. So I knew who 2 of these 3 were from that family tree, and I can visualize who's related to what, and our common ancestor is several generations back, so we would be like 3rd cousins or 4th cousins.
L'albero l'abbiamo fatto io e mio fratello nell'83, l'ha disegnato mio fratello. I dati li abbiamo raccolti insieme nelle canoniche.
Però questi dati erano trascritti nei registri della parrocchia di Tassullo, pur essendo non nati lì, essendo nati tutti in America.
Perché sull'albero risultano tutti questi figli.
Chi c'è?
Uno dei figli è la madre,
è la mamma sua.
È la Mary Grace.
Grace, yes.
Forse lo facevano perché poi l'idea era quella di
magari di ritornare un giorno. Quindi venivano mandati i dati dei figli perché potessero...
la doppia cittadinanza.
Perché pensavamo fossero nati in Italia e partiti con tutti i figli, avendo trovato i dati lì in canonica. Invece ci hanno detto che sono partiti appena sposati. Quindi in qualche modo è arrivata la data di nascita, ce l'abbiamo, insomma, i nomi dei figli, che sarebbero i suoi zii e sua mamma.
E la mamma.
Esatto.
So I learned yesterday that my cousin Dean Demetio from South Carolina was here, well, here, but in Tusulo across the valley in 1998 or 1999. I didn't realize he had been here and that there was some exchange between my relatives and the people here.
Yesterday, when you saw that the picture with Dean and Matteo and the family and the children, they have that fish, long fish, and you.
Made you laugh.
Yes,
and
I made you laugh.
You eventually learned that no, that wasn't a real fish, but Dean is a troublemaker.
Ah.
My mother never did like him because he's a troublemaker.
Troublemaker è un trafficone. Ah.
My mother is very serious, so she doesn't like a lot of joking, and Dean likes to tease people.
You think that was a joke?
Yeah. Somewhere I read that the fish was actually put into the photograph artificially.
È per quello forse che lui si è messo a ridere, però per noi era una foto.
Because that was an enormous fish. I didn't think of it when I first saw it, but wait, no.
Per cui andate in America adesso voi?
Sì, sì. Andiamo nell'Ohio. Next year.
No, è una battuta. Vedremo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A lunedì. Arrivederci.
Thank you very much.
Grazie. A lunedì, on Monday, until Mondays, yes.
Castel Valer by the count.
Yes.
Now, the story is that several generations further back, the Count of some part of Tyrol needed an accountant, so he brought a German man down from Bavaria, Mr. Kirschbaumer, who then married a Trentino woman. So I'm 1/16 Bavarian, 15/16 of northern Italy. So of course, I knew my father's parents more so than my mother's, but I remember my mother's mother also. She raised chickens, which was pretty unusual in the 1960s, and ate eggs and then chickens on Sunday, I guess. I think when my mother was small, she remembers that every year they would get 100 baby chickens, peeps, and then they would let them grow and eat the eggs as they came throughout the year, and then eat a chicken every Sunday or something like that.
Wir haben ein paar Freunde in Spanien mit Pellets, weil die sagen, es passt richtig. Ne?
Come trovi un ingegnere estroverso? Quando lui, let me see. Quando lui ti parla, lui non guarda la sua scarpa, lui guarda la tua scarpa.
Questo era a motivare, perché tutti gli dicono sei troppo modesto, sei troppo timido, poi in genere gli ingegneri non sono estroversi, ok? Al massimo
quelli proprio fuori.
Ok, questo è. Ma lui ha fatto di più. No, but you've done more than
Con grande piacere Slow Food è qua oggi in questo camp all'Istituto, alla Fondazione, per garantire e confermare quanto un atto agricolo come quello del mangiare possa modificare un sistema in crisi, che è quello del come cibarsi nel futuro sul nostro pianeta. E dalle piccole azioni quotidiane che noi oggi abbiamo visto anche provate, collaudate dai nostri cuochi di terra madre, siamo riusciti a sfamare 80 persone con poca legna, con poco fumo e dei cibi prelibati, materie prime importanti, ma le materie prime base di un'alimentazione che si può trovare in qualunque altro posto del mondo, diversa ma base.
Sì, perché sennò mi vola via, c'è un po' d'aria. Adesso io direi un attimo.
So my grandfather there were several jokes that he liked to tell, but one of them, my favorite, was that the guy comes from what he called the old country. He always called it the old country. Comes from the old country, so he learns to drive, and he's taking his driver's license test. So as part of the test, the examiner asks the question, what does the red light mean? The red light means stop. What does the green light mean? The green light means go. What does the yellow light mean? The yellow light means go like hell to beat the red light. And as I recall, he had rather large ears, and he would shake his head and his ears would move, and it was particularly funny to watch him do it. I couldn't quite do it as well as he could, but that was my favorite joke that he would tell.